Ever frantically scrolled through an ex's Instagram wondering, are we really friends or is this getting weird?
Mm,
You are so not alone.
definitely not.
And that, my friends, is the exact question we're tackling in today's deep dive. Can exes really be friends?
Ooh, good one.
We're dissecting a podcast episode called Navigating Ex Relationships. Is it okay to stay close? Ready to untangle this age-old dilemma.
Let's do it. It always seems like a simple question on the surface, right?
Sure.
It gets complicated.
Oh, absolutely. So complicated. And this podcast we're looking at, it dives right into some major factors to consider, starting with, are you even emotionally ready to be friends with an ex?
Right, because it's not just about saying, hey, let's be friends, and everything magically works out.
Exactly. And the podcast really breaks it down in a practical way. Like, have you actually truly processed all those leftover emotions from the breakup?
Yeah, have you? And can you look at your ex without instantly romanticizing the entire past? It's really about honestly assessing where you're at emotionally.
That makes so much sense. It's like, are you really over them? Or are you secretly wishing for that movie montage reunion?
Totally. And that ties into another point the podcast makes. How would your current partner feel about this whole ex-friend situation?
Yeah, that's a conversation you can't just skip over.
Definitely not.
The episode actually gave this example of a listener who was constantly anxious because their partner wasn't cool with their ex relationship.
Oh, I bet that went well.
Total recipe for tension and mistrust.
And that is exactly why the podcast really emphasizes setting crystal clear boundaries with everyone involved. They even suggest using those I statements when you're talking to your ex and your current partner about it.
So no more tiptoeing around the issue. Just be upfront and specific about what you're all comfortable with.
Exactly. Like, I feel a little uncomfortable when we talk about our past relationship. Can we focus on something else?
Okay, I like that. Direct and honest.
And this is where it gets interesting. The podcast calls it motivation assessment. Figuring out why you even want to stay friends in the first place.
Oh, that's a good point. Because it's easy to say, yeah, let's be friends. But are you being real with yourself about what's motivating that decision?
Exactly. Are you looking for closure? Are you hoping for actual friendship? Or is there something else going on under the surface? And if your motivation isn't the same as your ex's,
No.
that's when things can get messy.
Hmm.
The podcast actually shared this story.
Okay. You cannot leave me hanging with that story. Unrequited love and karaoke. What happened?
Well, this listener, they thought they were doing everything right. You know, they had the let's be friends talk,
Yeah.
set some boundaries, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so where did it all go wrong?
Turns out the ex,
Yeah.
still had some feelings,
Oh, no. So did they just come right out with it?
pretty much.
Yeah.
Fast forward to karaoke night. Everyone's having a good time, a few drinks in, feeling brave.
Oh, no. I can already see where this is going.
And then, bam, the ex dedicates a super romantic song to our listener, right there, in front of the new partner.
Oh, that's just brutal. What did the listener do?
What can you do? They were mortified. The new partner was definitely confused. And the ex, fueled by, karaoke courage, insisted it was just a song.
Oh, my gosh. This is why we should just stay home.
Right. But, this whole disaster is exactly why the podcast stresses being super clear about those motivations for staying friends, like
Yeah.
genuinely on the same page. Because unrequited love and karaoke, recipe for disaster.
For sure. But the podcast did share some good stories too, right? Not all ex-relationships are doomed karaoke nights.
Oh, absolutely. They talked about this other listener who actually managed to build a really healthy friendship with their ex. And what worked for them was that they both consciously made an effort to create this new type of relationship.
So less about rekindling old flames and more about mutual respect, shared interests.
Exactly. The podcast even got into some psychology stuff here, talking about attachment styles and how those can totally play into how comfortable we are with exes.
Oh, interesting. So if you have a secure attachment style, it might be way easier to set those boundaries than if you have, say, an anxious attachment style.
Right. It's not just about willpower or anything. It's about understanding how our own past experiences, might be influencing us now.
Yeah.
The podcast really emphasized how important self-awareness is in these situations.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's where that open communication comes in handy, right? Talking to your ex and yourself honestly about what you're thinking and what could be challenging.
Exactly. Like, instead of just saying, we'll be friends, be specific. The podcast gave this great example. I'm cool hanging out with a group, but one-on-one coffee dates. maybe not right now.
Okay, so clear, direct communication. No more vague promises or hoping everyone's a mind reader. What else did they say?
Oh, this is a big one. This final point they made about navigating ex relationships, it's all about remembering the bigger picture.
The bigger picture. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So we've talked about boundaries, communication, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, the podcast really emphasizes that your current relationships, those should always come first.
That makes sense. You don't want your friendship with an ex to, like, sabotage a relationship that's actually working.
Exactly. And the episode gives some really good advice about how to, avoid that whole mess.
Right.
One thing they suggested was to, check in with your partner pretty regularly about how they're feeling about the situation.
Okay, so not like, are you threatened by my ex? But more like, hey, I really value how you feel about this. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. It's all about making sure your partner feels heard and reassured,
Mm.
like they're the priority.
Love that. And hey, if you can talk about this stuff openly, that's got to be good for your relationship anyway, right?
Right. The podcast actually said that having those open conversations, it can actually make your current relationship stronger. It builds trust because it shows your partner you're committed to making them feel safe and secure.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I have an entirely new playbook for navigating these ex-friend situations.
Me too. It's definitely more complicated than it seems.
Way more complicated. But on that note, any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
As we've been talking, I keep thinking about this one question the podcast asked, and it really stuck with me. They asked, if you could go back, what's one thing you wish you'd done differently in a past relationship with an ex?
Ooh, that's a good one. Everyone's got those what-if moments, right?
Totally. But it's not really about dwelling on the past. It's about learning from it. So you can take those past experiences, both the good and the karaoke catastrophes, and use them to make healthier choices going forward.
Love that. Learning from our past selves so we can build even stronger relationships in the future.
Exactly.
That is some seriously wise advice to end on. All right, everyone, that's it for today's deep dive. Until next time.